Hello there, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As been handed over by John, my name is Brian Finlay, and I'm a lecturer here at GCU in the field of human resource management. It's a genuine pleasure to welcome our afternoon's alumni talk, where we are joined by an exceptional leader in the field of talent and organisational development, Stephen Mulvenna. Stephen is the Senior Director of Talent and Development for North America at the Coca-Cola Company, and brings a wealth of experience from a range of high-profile global organisations, roles and projects. With deep expertise in talent management, leadership development, coaching and organisational design, Stephen has successfully led geographically dispersed teams and built authentic relationships across culturally diverse environments. His insights promise to be both inspiring and practical, and I can underscore that because Stephen has spoken to a postgraduate student last year and it went down a storm. For anyone that's interested in the future of talent and leadership, drawing on his experience of leading global teams and shaping organisational development strategies, Stephen will share perspectives on building authentic relationships, developing leaders and navigating the complexities of rapidly changing business environment. Today's session offers a unique opportunity, to learn from someone who's not only driven impactful strategies, but also championed the development of people and leaders worldwide. After the presentation, I will be asking Stephen questions that have either been submitted prior to the event or in the Q&A. I have received a lot of questions before today's event, and I will continue to collate them as we go through, and I will do my very best to kind of group these together and theme them around topics that attendees are particularly interested in asking about. Okay, but before that, and without any further ado, it's my greatest honour to invite Stephen Mulvenna to deliver his afternoon talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian, for the warm welcome. And good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Mulvenna. As Brian said, I'm the Senior Director of Talent and Development for Coca-Cola North America. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, in the USA, hence the good morning and good afternoon to you. As I drove to the office this morning, I did the usual call back to my family in Scotland, and the question always comes up, what's the weather like today? And I'm told it's a stormy and grey day in Glasgow today. So my slides today are very, very colourful, and I'm hoping that that brings some colour to the conversation today. Secondly, I want to say thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this conversation today. I am an alumni of the university. Very, very happy memories of my time at Glasgow Caledonian. And I'm just delighted to be able to share with you some insights and learnings today. And I hope you're able to take something from this. A few weeks ago, I watched the presentation from a prior alumni from Nike, and he was talking in his presentation about the work that he's doing with the university in terms of helping to curate course content. He looks at coursework that students are submitting, etc. And I thought that was a really lovely example of the amazing work that Glasgow Caledonian are doing to bridge the gap between academia and industry. And I truly think this university is a great example of that. So thrilled to be here today. Looking forward to talking to you in more detail. Two things I'm going to do today. I'm going to share with you a little bit more about my career journey and talk to you about some of the highs and lows along the way. And, I hope that provides some useful insights to you. And then I'll talk in a bit more detail about the actual work that I do. And I recognise that some people on the call today may be working in HR or looking to work in HR. So just to share a little bit of a practical insight into the work that I do on a day-to-day basis. So let me start from the beginning. I graduated from Glasgow Caledonian in 2002. I was part of the master's programme, 2001 through 2002. And I was trying to think to myself, what was my experience like at Glasgow Caledonian? You'll see three words on the slide here. I had a lot of fun at Glasgow Cali, as we call it. Just a lot of fun and really happy memories from my time there. Also formed a lot of really strong, solid friendships, many of which stand the test of time today. But I think the most important thing for me from my university experience with Glasgow Caledonian was the practical learning. The classes that I took really focused on industry. The classes that I took focused on practicality and really making sure that you were learning practical skills which you could then apply in the workplace. And as I graduated from university and moved to work, I really was able to apply those. So I think you're in a really great place as you begin your career. And I really endorse this focus on making sure that you're getting as much exposure to industry as possible. So here is my career in numbers. So I've been working for 23 years, having graduated from Glasgow Caledonian in 2002. I've worked for 3 different companies which span 3 different industries. those industries being retail, consumer goods, and alcoholic beverages. Over those 23 years, I've taken 12 different roles. Some of those have been roles which have lasted 18 months to 2 years, others roles have taken 3 or 4 years. But most importantly, those roles have afforded me a tremendous amount of experiences and stretch opportunities along the way. I've been really lucky to live in 5 different countries. Interesting fact, born in Scotland, but I've never actually worked in Scotland. So I hope one day to get the opportunity to do that. But I've worked and lived in 5 different countries. I've taken one career break during my 23 years, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that later. And the lessons I've learned along the way are too many to put a number to, but what I do hope to do is share some of those lessons with you today. This is my career and kind of journey in some images here. So I went to Strathclyde University from 1996 and graduated in the year 2000. A wonderful time to graduate when you look at the world was in the cusp of a lot of new things happening as we turned into the new millennium. I then took a gap year. I went to STA Travel in Byres Road and I bought a round the world ticket which cost me £800. The rules of that ticket were you had to fly east from Glasgow, you were allowed to stop in 8 different places and you had to return back to Glasgow. So during that gap year I actually circumnavigated the entire globe, which was an awesome opportunity. During my gap year, I was not looking for jobs, and therefore I decided the best thing for me to do would be go back to university rather than start looking for jobs at that point in time, and use my year on the master's programme at Glasgow Caledonian to actually find a job. And that's precisely what I did. In terms of my career, I've worked in the headquarters of the retailer Sainsbury in London. I worked in their HQ for 5 years. I've worked for Coca-Cola for 16 years. I've intentionally said 10 plus 6, and I'll explain to you why a little bit later. I've taken 1 year career break, and then I worked 2 years at Diageo. For those of you who do not know who Diageo is, if you've ever had a Guinness, a Johnny Walker, a Ciroc vodka, or a Baileys, then that is Diageo. Diageo is the world's biggest alcohol company. To the right of the slide, the places that I've worked and lived. Top left is the Rock of Dumbarton. So I'm from Dumbarton. That's where I was born and brought up. My family still live there. Many of my friends still live there. I'll be going back in a few weeks' time for Christmas. So I was born there, then spent some time living in Sydney, Australia. I spent 9 years living in London. During my time in London, I also spent a short period of time working and living in Vienna, Austria. I spent 10 years living in Athens, Greece. Which was a tremendous and amazing opportunity. I would say life-changing. And then I'm now living in Atlanta, Georgia. So I've lived across multiple locations. I've also been lucky to do business in Africa, the Middle East, India, China. So I've really had the opportunity to work and live in a variety of different places, which has just been an amazing growth opportunity for me. So one of the briefs for me today is to talk about my career and to talk about how I've gotten to where I've gotten to. And quite often in these circumstances, it's, here's all of the amazing things that I've done to get to this destination. But the reality is, and if anyone's ever trained for a marathon or tried to learn a new language or just tried to do something new in their life, it's very rarely a linear, straightforward line. It's quite often actually squiggly, up and down, roundabout, back and forward. So what I'm going to share with you today is a little bit more about that squiggly journey that I've taken. And there have been highs and lows along the way. There's been tremendous growth opportunities and there's been tough times. And I think if anyone is embarking on a career, regardless of what that career will be, regardless of the industry, it's really important to understand that, there will be a squiggly line to help you get there. So before I do that and talk about my own career, I would love to hear from you. So there's a question at the top of this slide, which is, which attributes do you believe will be most important for you as you transition from university to work? Now, if you've already made that transition, note how that was for you. All we're looking for here is like a word. It could be resilience, it could be hard work, it could be curiosity, whatever. You can scan the QR code on the screen, or you can go to the website, wooclap.com, and enter the event code in there. I'm hoping that when you scan that, there should be an opportunity for you to input feedback. I don't know, Brian or John, if maybe you can try and just give me a thumbs up and tell me if it's working. That will generate a word cloud, and I'm just super interested to hear from your own personal perspective. What are some of the attributes that you think are important as you transition from university to work? So I'll just pause for a moment and just give you the opportunity to do that.
I'll just come in and say that this session has been beamed into our second year International Work Organisation and Society module lecture. So please, students, feel free to scan, contribute, that'd be great.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing this screen and move to the other screen and just take a look at some of what we have been shared. So just one moment. Okay, I see resilience in there, teamwork, communication, the use of technology, which is I'm learning every day is becoming more and more important. Group work and teamwork, adaptability, determination, strong work ethic, perseverance, resilience, yep. Friends and money, we do hope to achieve both of those things through our work. Growth, digital, support. So, some of the things I'm going to talk about here, I think are perfectly captured on this screen in terms of some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. So what I'm now going to do is just talk in a little bit more detail. Later on in the presentation, I'll give a second opportunity for us to scan a QR code and answer another question. So thank you very much for that feedback. And, as I see the words on the screen here, it resonates with me in terms of my own experience. So thank you for that. Let me just stop sharing and return back to the presentation. Okay, so let me just go back to where we were. So as I said, I'm going to talk to you about my career very briefly. I'll spend 10 minutes or so just talking you through my career journey. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that in 6 different acts. And I would love to say this was my creative idea to come up with 6 different acts to my career. But actually, I used our AI coaching tool here at Coca-Cola. And this was the advice that our tool gave me. Our tool is called Nadia, and this was the advice she gave me to talk about my career. So I'm taking her advice, and I hope it lands well with you. What I'm going to do is give you like an anecdote from my career in terms of what happened, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what I learned. So for me, the start was like what I call bold beginnings. And when I was at Glasgow Caledonian University, I was really focused on finding a graduate training program. During that master's year, every other week I was on a train or a flight to London, going for interviews, going for assessment centres. And this was back before you were doing all of this stuff online. So some companies would bring you down 3 or 4 times only to get to the end of the process and say, unfortunately, you've not been successful. So I went through many, many interviews and many, many assessments. Having studied HR and marketing, my goal was always that I wanted to work in HR, but I wanted to work for a big brand. That was as much as I knew. Other than that, I was pretty flexible about whether that was Sainsbury's, British Airways, Virgin, Royal Bank of Scotland. I was pretty open as to what that organisation would be. After a year of trying really hard, I landed a role on Sainsbury's HR graduate training programme in their headquarters in London. Sainsbury's were only hiring 2 HR graduate trainees and from thousands of applications. So it was a really, really competitive process. And to be honest, as I got to the end of it, I'm not sure I had the energy to keep going, but I stayed resilient and got to where I wanted to get to. So in 2002, I moved to London. I remember telling my parents I'll probably be back in 2 or 3 years. 23 years later, he has yet to return. But that was a really amazing experience moving to London and getting my first job down in London. My first job, as I said, was with a retail organisation in their headquarters. So what that really gave me was a really strong grounding in the fundamentals of HR and a general grounding in how a business operates. That was back in the days when you were in the office 5 days per week and really understanding how the business operates. So what I learned from that is it's really important, in my opinion, that you have a plan in terms of what you want to achieve from your career, but make sure that plan is flexible. Maybe it's I know I want to work in HR. I'm pretty open to any industry, or I know I want to work in marketing. I'm pretty open to where the location I go to is. That flexibility will always serve you well in your career. I would also say don't give up and keep persevering. I'm sure any one of you on this call today has had many letdowns along the way and disappointments where you think, I'm not sure I can keep going, but I really do encourage that perseverance. Someone has to get the job, and why should that person not be you? When you land your first job, I would encourage you to learn the basics early and do the hard work. So by learning the basics, for me in HR, that was things like observing trade union negotiations, understanding how do you select a talent, how do you run a disciplinary or grievance process. Not necessarily the sexy and fun part of HR, but the sooner you get yourself, acquainted with that kind of stuff, it will help you fly further in your career. I would also just encourage you at the early part of your career, grab every opportunity to learn. I used to be the person that would put my hands up and volunteer to get involved in different projects at work, and it really served me well for the future. So my career did get off to a flying start. I was on the HR graduate training program, and then after that, they actually promoted me to run the entire graduate program for Sainsbury's. So I went from being a graduate to running the entire program, which was a truly amazing learning and stretch opportunity. I had always been told that your first job you should leave after about 5 years because, you should go and seek out another industry. So the second part of my career was this ambition meeting a little bit of uncertainty. And I was on the metro in London one day, the Underground, and I saw an advert in the People Management magazine, and it was for a job at Coca-Cola, looking for a HR business partner for the UK and Ireland. I'd never been an HR business partner, but I'd got some of the fundamentals. And the advert said they were looking for someone with 7 to 10 years experience. I had 5. So I kept flicking through the magazine and thought, no point in trying. But I kept going back and saying, but you really want to work for a big brand. This was one of your goals. So I decided, you know what, apply. What's the worst thing that can happen? I don't get the job, and we move on. And long story short, because you know that I work for Coca-Cola, so there's no big aha moment here, but I did get that job. And I moved to work as the HR business partner for Coca-Cola in Great Britain and Ireland. The reality is I was probably underqualified for that job, and the first year or so was really, really tough, really tough. I was like facing off with senior finance directors, helping them with their people plans, etc. And I just was a little bit out of my depth, if I'm truly honest. But I kept on focusing and persevering, and after time, just got more and more confident. And actually, within my first few years, I was asked to go over to Austria and in Vienna and help them run one of the change programs there. So my learning from this was really, you will never know unless you try. So, if you're looking at something and thinking, I'm not ready for that or I'm not experienced enough, put your best foot forward. Imposter syndrome is also a thing. I think we all get it. And every human being experiences that. I know I certainly did, but understand and know your true value. And when things do get tough, because they will, be resilient. The more resilience you have, I think the further you will go in your career. So after many 5 or so years in London, really things going well at Coca-Cola, I went to what I call embracing the unknown, and Coca-Cola asked me to move to become the head of talent and development for Central and Southern Europe. And of course, that would require me to move to a new location. And I was given the opportunity to move to Austria, Greece, Italy, or Poland. Having spent a summer in Austria, it was a little bit too boring for me, a little bit too sedentary, so I decided not Austria. Italy, the choice was to go to Milan. I come from Glasgow, which rains a lot. It rains a lot in Milan. I was not ready to go there. Poland was too cold for me. I did my research. It says that Greece has 300 days of sun. I decided to move to Greece. I moved to Greece in 2011. I'd never been before. I didn't speak the language. And I moved, for those of you who may remember this, at the peak of the financial crisis. So this was really, really tough. It was truly embracing the unknown and jumping into something that I just really was not sure about. I ended up living in Greece for 10 years, and my responsibilities got greater. I went from Central and Southern Europe to eventually leading the talent acquisition, also known as recruitment team, for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, which was my first serious people leadership role. So again, the move to Greece was a huge growth opportunity for me, simply because I was put into a new culture, a new environment, and a new place that I didn't really know about. So what I learned from there is, don't be afraid to take calculated risks. Risk taking is a good thing, but I would always encourage it to be on a calculated basis. Think about whether this risk will pay off. The biggest changes in your life, whether those be personal or career changes, they usually do bring the most significant growth for you as well. And then finally, I also learned a lot about being a people leader within this context. And it's a really, really important capability, but also one that brings a lot of growth to you. So after 10 years with Coca-Cola, I then took what was called a leap of faith, and Coca-Cola asked me to move to the headquarters in Atlanta to take on a global responsibility. I'd been with Coke for 10 years, and I decided it just wasn't the right time for me to move to the USA for many, many different reasons. I just wasn't ready. And therefore, I decided actually to leave Coca-Cola. Coke was all I really knew. I was in my late 30s. It was a big chunk of my life. It was a big part of my identity. But I decided it was time to take a pause. So I actually left Coke. I took a severance package and I didn't have a job. And I remember many people saying to me, Stephen, you're crazy. You've left one of the biggest brands in the world. I've given you a chance to move to the USA and you've walked away from that. But my learning was that I had to trust my gut. And I knew at that point in time in my life and where my life was that this was the right decision for me. Despite that, I always advise when you're leaving any job, whether that be a supermarket, a restaurant, or Coca-Cola, always leave with gratitude, respect, and grace. You never know when that might come back to be a further opportunity. And surround yourself with good people. You know, when you make a tough decision in life, sometimes people will be naysayers and say that's a wrong choice you're making. But if you know what's right in your heart, surround yourself with the people who will help you make sure you've made the right decision. So the fifth part of my career was like a pause, and I spent 9 months traveling. And back to that story I told you earlier on about Australia, I spent 9 months traveling and spent some time in really cool locations, just kind of refinding myself. I also went to Greek school and made the decision at that point in time that I wanted to become a Greek citizen. I qualified with 10 years of living there to be one. And I went through many an arduous process to get there, but a few months ago I actually got my Greek passport, which I'm incredibly happy about. And then at the end of those 9 months, I decided time to try a new industry. So I moved to the alcoholic beverages industry and I became the head of HR for Diageo, Greece and Italy. I was the first non-Greek and non-Italian ever to hold that position. And it was a really amazing industry to work in, very complementary industry to the soft drinks industry. And I don't mean that you can mix a Coke with a Johnny Walker, but more so just the point that the industries culture-wise are quite complementary, and it was a really great learning experience for me. So my learning there was to try something new, and my learning there was like run towards what you love rather than running away from what you don't like. And I think anytime you make a choice in life, try to make sure you're going towards something that, you know, makes your heart sing rather than running away from something else. And then last but not least, I came full circle. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I got a call after 2 or 3 years with Diageo. And I got a call from Coke and they said to me, you know, we remember 3 years ago we asked you about this global role. We're coming back to you and asking, are you ready? Is now the right time? And it was the right time. So during COVID, I rejoined Coca-Cola in Greece. I spent a year working at home and then I relocated to the USA at the beginning of 2022. The work that I did in this global role was quite amazing. First of all, I was in the headquarters. I got exposure to working with our chief executive, with the board of directors. It was probably the biggest growth and stretch experience of my life. It was also the first time I was really getting first exposure to really strategic work versus executional work. And I think it's good in your career to find that blend. Are you more of a strategist, someone who likes to think, or more of an executor, someone who likes to do? And I think getting that blend of experiences helps you to understand that better. And then finally, this move to the USA, this move to a more virtual, flexible working style after COVID just calls upon you to be agile and think about how you work differently. And with the advent of AI, I'm certainly thinking more about that. And my biggest learning, which I always remind everyone, is remember it's just a job and try to always put it in that context. So that's just a little bit on my career. Let me talk to you now about Coca-Cola and the work that I do actually on a daily basis. So you'll see 3 words in this slide, which are okay, Coca-Cola, and hello. And whether this is a myth or true, it's said that these are the 3 most universally understood words in the English language, regardless of which language you speak. These are the 3 most understood words in the world. And it's fascinating that one of those words is a brand, and that brand is Coca-Cola, which is one of the world's best known brands and, you know, a truly amazing company to work for. Couple of insights. We have only 18,000 employees. A lot of people would expect Coca-Cola to be a huge, huge company. We franchise out our bottling process. We actually have one in East Kilbride. And with all of those people included, we actually have 700,000 people working across Coca-Cola. 200 brands, you see some of them here. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Coke, Fanta, Sprite, but there's a whole plethora of brands that touch upon sports, dairy, water, and we're actually making a foray into alcohol as well. We are the biggest sponsor for the World Cup and the Olympics. For those of you who know, the World Cup is, of course, coming to the USA next year, and we're all hoping Scotland will be there. And the Olympics are coming to the USA in 2028. You can see the revenue numbers there. And then the last one, which I think is really fascinating for me, but there are 2.2 billion servings of Coca-Cola products a day. A serving is defined as like a glass of Coke or a glass of Fanta or a glass of Sprite, whatever. There's 2.2 billion servings of those per day globally. So it just gives you a sense of the size of the organization. In the USA alone, Coca-Cola is responsible, or the Coca-Cola system is responsible for 0.23% of the USA GDP. It contributes to 0.56% of all employment in North America. And for every one job that we have, 9 jobs are created in the wider value chain. So it really does contribute quite significantly from an employment and economy perspective. This slide just gives you a sense of the work that I do on a daily basis. So the first area I look at is what's called talent management. And simply put, that's like having the right talent in the right place at the right time. I work with the business to make sure we're looking very closely at our business plans, our long-range plans, and our organizational priorities, and therefore making sure that we have the right talent in place to support those, to make sure we're giving the right people the right experiences, to be able to help grow the business. I also look at what we call succession planning, and succession planning is strengthening the future of our pipeline. So we actively at Coca-Cola identify potential successors for roles in the future, and then we make sure that we're equipping them with the skills, the experiences, projects, mentoring, coaching, etc., which really help them to be ready for these kind of jobs in the future. When you look at an organization as complex as Coca-Cola, we're in 194 countries, I think. That also includes moving people around the globe. So you've seen that I've moved to various different countries with Coca-Cola. Our succession planning methodology makes sure that we can support that. So for example, to be successful in North America, you might have had to go through like a China or a Japan to get some of that developing market experience, which you can then bring to a market like North America. So we're trying to cross-infuse experiences to make sure that people are as competitive as possible across the board. I also look after leadership development, which is equipping our leaders for success. And leadership development can be, for example, a leadership program. But we also do things like leadership coaching, where we give a leader a coach, which helps them to develop the skills and experiences that they need to be successful. And we also regard that everyone at Coca-Cola is a leader, whether you're leading a team or not. We're providing them with certain skills and experiences to support that. I'm responsible for learning and capabilities. Learning is when you think about helping someone to develop skills that are a little bit more generic and support their job. So for example, influencing skills, negotiation skills, project management. Capabilities is a little bit more towards capabilities that are broad and agnostic across the organization. For example, artificial intelligence. We're doing a lot of work at the moment in Coca-Cola to grow that skill set. Or skills that you need to do your job. For example, in human resource management, we might teach people how to be more effective in talent management or learning and development. I'm heavily involved in talent assessment, and at Coca-Cola we have tools which help us to assess our talent. Those include psychometric tools, include personality inventories, and cognitive ability tests, which help us to better understand the respective capabilities, potential, and scalability of our employees. Also, on an annual basis, we measure every employee's performance in terms of the performance that they're giving to the organization with respect to the organization's goals and the individual goals of the talent. And then for a very small proportion of the population, about 7 to 10% of our employees, we identify them as high potential. And high potential means that they have the potential to go further, faster than other people. They have the ability to scale to a greater extent and take on more complex opportunities. For those employees who are identified as being high potential, we make sure that we give them accelerated development opportunities so that they are moving at a further and faster pace than their peers. And then lastly, I look at analytics and insights. And this for me is really, really important because when you work in human resources and you walk into a room of people, quite often emotions can get in the way, or like a leader will give an opinion on a person which is based on a value judgment rather than facts. And it's really important for me that we work on facts versus emotions. So I really try to drive as much analytics and insights to connect the dots between two things. So, for example, if we're investing in leadership development program X, is that program then filtering to the organization, and are we seeing improved organizational performance? Are we seeing improved retention? Whatever the metric is you're looking for, what I'm always trying to do is show correlation between one thing and another to make sure you're making the right investments for the business. So that gives you a very high level of my job. If anyone watching this today is interested to learn more, you can find me on LinkedIn. Brian or John can provide my email details. I'll be more than happy to connect with you for a one-on-one talk, or if you want to ask me any questions by email, I'll be absolutely happy to do that. So let me come to the second question. I'm just going to move the survey on so that you can answer the next question. So one sec. Okay, so I will share the QR code again. Okay, so the question I'd like to ask you now, and this is a multiple choice one, it's not a word cloud this time, so there's only 5 options. And of course, you may have an opinion that goes beyond those 5, but as you think about the future world of work, and the future, I think, looks very different to particularly the moment in time we're in right now. What do you think is the most effective way to prepare for the future of work? And I've given 5 options in here, and of course, if there's any other comments, please feel free to add them. And again, John or Brian, if you could just give me the thumbs up to show that this is working, thank you. So I'll move to the other screen and we can see some of the results coming in. Wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. And I can see that the majority of people are thinking that actually getting some experience through internships or projects is the most important. If I understand correctly, at the university, there continues to be the opportunity within your program to go off and do an industry experience. And I'm glad to see that that continues to be the case. Mentoring and peers, I think that's great to see as well. And again, I understand the university do have an industry mentorship program. Last year, I actually got the chance to mentor a student called Ian, and he and I are still in touch, and it was a great opportunity. I would draw your attention to number 3, the learning and adapting to new skills. I think that's really, really important. And I think being agile as you enter the workforce is important. When I say being agile, I mean being able to adapt to the different environments that are coming our way. So thank you again for sharing your insights here. Okay, just a couple of slides and then we'll move to the Q&A. I won't labor this one, but I think looking ahead, the biggest thing is the advent of AI. And at Coca-Cola recently, we've launched 2 things. Number 1, we've launched an AI coach, which any employee can use, and that coach is in place to help provide guidance. And that can be anything from guidance to having a difficult conversation to preparing for something like this, preparing a conversation with your leader. And it's been incredibly, incredibly helpful. And I think for me, it just shows you the power of AI. We also have our own Coca-Cola version of ChatGPT, again, which is we're using on a day-to-day basis. So I think as we project the future, the use of AI is going to be of tremendous impact. And lastly, if I think about the 6 things I would just ask you to think about as you move to the future. I think adaptability is key and the ability to be adaptable to changing circumstances. Resilience, it's never going to be easy. There will be really, really tough times along the way. Staying resilient and persevering, I think, will serve you well. Risk taking, calculated risks, as I mentioned, I think are in the right context are important. And that could be moving to a new location. It could be moving to a new industry, whatever. Emotional intelligence. I'm a really, really huge advocate of emotional intelligence. You can be the smartest person in the room, but if you cannot read that room, if you cannot demonstrate empathy, emotional awareness, emotional adaptability, that's where some challenges may emerge. I encourage you to stay curious about what's going around you, stay curious about other people, stay curious about other cultures, new technologies. And lastly, integrity. I think integrity is key as you enter into any environment, and one which has I've held true as I've kind of moved through my career. So with that, thank you so much for your time. I hope there was some useful insights for you here. And Brian, I believe I hand over to you. So thank you so much.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for your presentation there. I've been burrowing away in the background as a qualitative researcher trying to theme the kind of questions that I'm going to ask you. And it's really good you were talking just lastly there about the introduction of AI into Coca-Cola. So I've just got a few questions that I've devised around that. So what are the top 3 skills leaders will need in a kind of hybrid human AI world where they manage both AI agents and humans?
First thing I would say is an understanding of AI. I think that has to be your entry point. You know, if you're working in an environment where you're managing people and AI bots, whatever, then I think staying abreast of that technology will help you remain relevant. The second thing I would say is judgment. You know, machines can crunch data, but relationships always rely on empathy, trust, human understanding. So, you know, I don't think those can get in the way of those things. And then thirdly, I would say critical thinking, like you always have to blend an AI outcome with your own perspective, your own judgment, question assumptions, question bias, and all the things that can come through machine learning. So I think that human element has to remain.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that it's really just understanding that AIs could be a potential support function for decision making. You know, it's not like a replacement or an outsourcing. So I would absolutely echo that based on research and where we are at the moment. Just moving on, just to kind of keep a pace because I know we're limited on time. So what do you see as the likeliest impacts of AI specifically on talent management and leadership development?
Yeah, firstly, I think so. I was referring earlier to the AI coach that we have, and if I think about the time that that has saved me, just in terms of decision making, building briefs, etc., I think the most obvious one is time saving and efficiency. You know, it helps you to make faster and more effective decisions. From a HR perspective, particularly, I also think identifying the skills that the organization needs to grow. I think AI can really help in things like that. Helping an employee build a development plan. If you tell an employee you need to be better at skill X, AI can really help you to do that. I think it can help streamline recruitment. I'm not necessarily advocating for AI to do your recruitment, but I think it can help streamlining recruitment, for example, doing CV screening, etc. But on all of those examples I've given, I would always say there has to be a human side which catches out any bias, and keeping people front and center of what we're doing.
Yeah, no, I would agree, and I think it's really just to be mindful of the biases in the creation of AI.
Yes, indeed.
How it's functioned, particularly if it's a more westernized perspective when we're talking about, you know, culturally diverse teams. I think it's really important to remember that. And kind of turning like on your kind of day to day, you're talking about the use of Nadia, you're talking about the use of these kind of AI bots. And what's the kind of biggest tangible difference, like almost what the role of the impact is on your kind of day to day working and using these sort of AI platforms?
I would say like routine tasks, things that used to take me a lot of time, effort, and energy, and maybe things that I'm not so adept at. I think AI has helped to make those things easier and more streamlined. So that's a good thing. When I look at analytics, you know, I talked earlier on about drawing conclusions between data point X and Y. I don't claim to be the smartest data analyst ever, but I think you can provide the tools that can support that. And I think the kind of personalization of employee development are the 3 areas where I've seen it been particularly pertinent so far. I think if you ask me this same question in 12 months' time, it'll probably be a dramatically different answer. And I think I'm feeling on a day-to-day basis the evolution of this piece to our organisation.
No, I would agree, and I think it's the pace of change. I think, like you're
Yes,
saying, even 12 months feels like a total, like a wide, change when it comes to these kind of technologies. And as somebody who used to be a HR person who looked after payroll and analytics, which largely is going to be replaced by AI, I would say, in the
yes.
sort of future. That these kind of it just completely shapes differently how the HR function operates. I'm going to turn on to leadership and talent management questions. Just while my screen has frozen. There we go. How do you ensure geographically dispersed teams feel connected and engaged? And I think that's something really specific to your role. So I'm really
Yes.
keen to hear your views on that.
Yeah, when I worked in Greece, I had direct reports in Dubai, Johannesburg, Kenya, London, and various other places in between. Two things. Number one, I think the organizational culture tends to be quite consistent. We're very lucky in that regard. No matter which office you walk into, you kind of looks and feels like a Coca-Cola space. So I think that's a good start for everyone to be in the same place culturally. But the second thing for me is, making sure you have regular touch points, making sure that you're really clear upon the goals and objectives of the team. Making sure you've got kind of rituals within the team. Always making sure that you understand the individual needs, time zones, all of those kind of different things. And one of the things that we find most difficult is connecting with Asia, for example, because of we just have that natural time zone difference, which makes things very, very difficult. So things like sometimes we'll make sure we're up super early in the morning so that we're having a call with Asia at a time which is suitable for them. Other times it will be late at night for them. But I think remaining true to the culture, remaining true to the common goal, the vision and culture, I've always found particularly helpful. And kind of everyone's going in the same direction.
Great. No, and I think that's just something particularly for the students who are listening, that by the time when you go into your first sort of leadership role, that kind of geographically dispersed teams, I think, is going to become more and more normalized within
Yeah.
HR roles, especially
Mhm.
with hybrid working. So I think it's something really to kind of take note of. Um, Continuing with the theme of leadership and team management, what have you found to be the most effective approach to retaining talent in such a large, global, recognizable brand?
Yeah, it's interesting that the turnover at Coca-Cola is actually quite low. People tend to come and tend to stay. The other interesting thing for me is there's a turning point. There's a point, I think it's around 5 years. And once you pass that, there's a higher likelihood you'll stay than go. Um, Now, all of that being said, I think the younger generation coming through are probably more likely to want a variety of experiences, and therefore that might not be the case going forward. Because of the size of the company, this is an organization that if you are mobile and if you want the opportunity to live and work abroad, some people want that, some people don't want that. That opportunity is there. The other thing we're starting to do more of at Coke is move people between functions. So it used to be you'd come in and work in HR and die in HR. Now you might actually get a chance to move to marketing or finance or something like that. The third thing we're doing, we've created a new thing called Opportunity Marketplace, and I can put an opportunity on that marketplace. And anyone globally can bid for it. So I could say, I would like someone 10 hours a week to support me with designing succession planning, for example. And someone in China can bid for that work. They continue to stay in China and do their day-to-day job, but they get a project on this piece of work that's happening in North America. So we're looking at various different flexible ways in which people can build the skills and capabilities and experiences they need without always having to leave the country that they're based in.
Right. And I think, just to kind of chime with what you're saying there about, cross function and getting people to work in different parts of the business. So, as somebody who's worked in HR quite largely, I've also worked in visuals and I've also worked in logistics, and you actually pick up ways of working that could be applied to these functions. So I would definitely
Definitely.
advocate for cross training as much as possible. So I would absolutely agree with that. So I'm going to shift on to career advice and development. So these kind of questions are coming through, and it's really asking things like what skills or experience helped you most early in your career that business students today should focus on.
Yep, I would say regardless of the discipline that you want to work in, get your feet on or get underneath the skin of the basics of your function or discipline early on. So don't walk into the room and say, I want to be the creative strategic thinker, but actually, I want to understand how do I do the basic fundamentals of HR or marketing or finance. So that'd be number one. Number two, I would say understand the business that you're working in, particularly if you're working in HR. HR can be seen as a little bit of a support function or a ancillary function versus one which is actually truly helping the business grow, etc. So try to connect the dots between the work that you do and, how does this business actually make money? And then thirdly, I would say put your hand up to be involved in different things, because people will afford you opportunities earlier in your career. And in 10 years' time, you might have that aha moment that that thing you did 10 years ago is serving you well today. As you progress in your career, your time becomes a little bit more stretched. And there's some moments where you're like, oh, I wish I'd invested time in that earlier. So when you have time and capacity, I would say learn.
Yeah, nice, good advice there. And another good question I've got here. So what's the most valuable career advice you've ever received?
Yeah, I would say number one, people would advise me like build experiences. So don't obsess over like I want to go up the organization. Like build a bank of experiences and skills. And probably in my early career, I was a little bit like trying to climb the ladder, if you know what I mean. And I think the future of work is more about skills versus authority or growth. The person with the most diverse skills in the future will be the most successful person. Um, and then secondly, like don't overthink things. I have and still do to some extent have the ability to overthink and ruminate and I wish I'd said that or wish I did that. And I'm sure after this presentation I'll have some of those thoughts. So I would say try not to overthink things and people aren't spending that much time thinking about you. So don't put yourself in a place where you're obsessing over what people think of who you are.
Some good advice, definitely. Not to take yourself too seriously as well. It's always a
Yes,
positive thing.
indeed.
It's not that important. If you could give your past self any advice, what would it be?
Care less about what other people think. Don't be afraid to be yourself. Don't allow imposter syndrome to get in the way of success.
Good. Yes. I think we could all listen to that. I'm sure we can all reflect on that in our careers as we've gone through because we all feel like that sometimes.
Mhm.
And what advice would you give someone aspiring to build a career in human resource development?
I would say try and get exposure to human resources, and understand that it's funny. Quite often people say to me, hiring and firing. That's like the words that are used to describe
Yeah.
working in HR. Try to get a sense of the breadth of human resources and things like talent management and leadership development and succession. They're actually really strategic things that help grow and drive an organization. So I would say you try to understand the breadth of what's available. And then secondly, connect with people who do this job. And again, I'm putting myself out there to say if anyone does want to ask me anything, I'm more than happy to talk to you.
No, definitely. And I think like the tools like LinkedIn and other social media
Yes.
platforms is something that I didn't have in my early career. And I think it's a really, really good opportunity for students to even connect and follow different leaders and different types of organizations and start to kind of track the trends and the direction of travel. So I would encourage anybody watching to make sure that you're kind of involved in that conversation. So I'm mindful of things we're beyond 10 to now. So I've got a few other questions that I would like to get through because there's still some coming through. So I'm going to go to a question about global business, okay, first, and then I've got two other additional questions I've earmarked that I'd like to ask. So given the geopolitical uncertainty and trade barriers, how can work-based education programs prepare future leaders to balance operational performance, people development, and agility?
Okay. I think that so the geopolitical thing, I think we are in a very unique time at the moment. And it's probably one of the most challenging times geopolitically we've had. And being based in the USA in particular, I feel that and I live that experience on a day-to-day basis. Um, but I think I think you were talking about work-based experiences, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think getting exposure to the experiences that you need to grow and develop is important. When I was at Glasgow Caledonian, I think it was like a 3-month placement.
Mhm.
And again, it was with a small organization, but I think what I learned in that organization was one of the things that got me my first job, essentially, because I was able to go to my first interview. I used to work in Homebase, the DIY store when I was a student, and there was only so many examples I could give about serving a customer or, you know, doing a good job in the store. So being able to come and talk about a work-based thing that was in a business was super helpful. So for those of you who have had the chance to do a workplace experience, great. And if you haven't, I would encourage you to try and find one. And there's loads of internship programs out there, which will just give you that exposure and set you up to be successful, I think.
Definitely, just to echo that to the students that are watching, that there is work placement opportunities, and there is the opportunity to study abroad as well, which will also give you a lot of experiences if it's something that you're able to do, and that would help you to sort of understand a little bit more different areas and different cultures and experiences. So I would encourage students to consider that if they could. And just the two final questions I've got here that I've got is, what emerging trends in talent and leadership development excite you the most?
I would say the concept of like really personalized learning. So it used to be like you would take 20 people into a classroom and teach them how to influence. Now it might be like this person needs this and this person needs that based on a skills methodology that we're using. And that's something we're starting to dip our toe into at Coke. And I think that's going to really help people, you know, improve. Second thing I would say is skills-based talent management, which is does does this person have the skills to do this job based on an inventory of the most important skills versus just interviewing someone and hoping they're the right person for the job. I would say AI coaching and AI interventions to help people improve in the job beyond having to sit down and speak to a person. And lastly, I would say cross-functional working is becoming more and more and more important. And this whole notion of one discipline for life, I think, is changing.
Excellent. And then the last question I've got is, how do you build authentic relationships across culturally diverse environments?
Yeah, I think it's just really important to be respectful of the culture that you're entering. And living in Greece for 10 years was an amazing way for me to understand that. So, you know, ask questions, understand context, avoid assumptions, listen actively, look out for social cues. All of those things are really, really important. And I also think treat people with the respect that you would want to be treated in return. And I think often if you apply just some really, really basic principles, you'll succeed in this area. And I think culturally diverse teams, excuse me, I think those are the most effective because different perspectives and coming from different backgrounds and perspectives has a much more dramatic and positive impact than people probably realize.
Absolutely, and the contributions of diverse thinking when it comes to
Exactly.
decision making, especially when
Absolutely.
it comes to talent and when selecting and recruiting people, having a really diverse panel, it definitely makes much
100%.
much better decisions. So thank you so much for taking my questions and answering them for the audience. And that brings us to the end of the session. Stephen, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing your insights and your past experiences with the audience. And I
Thank you.
just want to thank everybody for tuning in on this sort of now dark and gloomy Glasgow. It's now pitch black.
It's dark.
It's now very
Okay.
dark. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for your time today, and I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you so
Cheers.
much.